Hello builders. We're going to cover a lot of ground in today's tutorial. We're going to start by registering our own custom button style in the Gutenberg editor, then we're going to sprinkle in some Fontawesome and end up with really cool buttons like these. Now if you've got a second, could you please hit that like button? It makes such a big difference to the channel. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel because we have so much upcoming content to show you how to build better websites faster. All right, let's get started.
All right, we're here in the Gutenberg editor and let's just create a button block to start. So we can go buttons, and it's a completely generic default button. And you can see that we have the built-in Gutenberg button styles available, fill and outline. Now we want to create our own button style. So let me show you how to add our own custom button style that can appear in this list. So first we'll click update. So the first thing we need to do is we need to register our own custom button style. And we're going to do it using just a few lines of PHP. And there's a couple different places in your theme you can put this code. So one option, if you go to Appearance, Themes, and then Theme Editor, you can put it in your themes functions.php file, and you can paste the code right here. Or you can use what I prefer to do, and that is use a plugin. And I personally love the code snippets plugin. And you can see you can toggle all these pieces of code on and off. You can put JavaScript code, PHP code, HTML, and this plugin is completely free from the WordPress repository. If we go to Add New, and you go to Code Snippets, you can install and activate this plugin. So all you have to do is go to Snippets, and I've already created the snippet, but all you have to do is we're just going to go Add New, and we can create one from scratch. But we would title it, okay, so we're going to register some new Gutenberg button styles, and we'll click Save Changes. And that's all you have to do to add a new snippet, and then you can create your PHP code right here. And we're going to delete the one that we just created, and I'm going to use the old one. So if we go to edit this one, you can see that there's this little bit of PHP, and I'm going to walk you through what it does and how it works. And you'll find the exact PHP code in the video description down below, so just go check that out, and you can copy and paste it yourself. So one thing to note before you use this code is it only works in WordPress version, I believe it's 5.35 and onwards. So if you're running an outdated version of WordPress, make sure you update to the most recent version, or you can't use this function because it's not going to exist in older versions of WordPress. So we're using a function called register block styles, and this function takes a couple arguments. So first is we're registering a block style for the core button block, and then we're just passing an array, and this allows us to customize the name of the custom style that we're adding. So we can assign a slug to the button as well as a label, which will appear in the editor and the backend. And if we just activate the snippet, so I can save changes and activate, and if we just reload our post back here and click on this button, you can see that our new button style has been created. Now it says button label because that was what we had set in our snippet. But if we simply change this to, for example, my icon button, this is the text that will appear in the editor when you're choosing the button style. And this is the slug that's going to be added to the HTML code. So we could call this, for example, icon button, and we'll save changes, reload, and now you can see we have the choice to make it my icon button. So we're going to select that, and we'll click update. And if we preview it on the front end, nothing has changed because we haven't assigned any styles to this button yet. But if you inspect the code, you can see that it's now added this is style icon button, and that icon button is the slug that we set up as the first argument here. So this is just the CSS class that's going to be added to the button in the HTML code. And that's how we're going to target our styles at this button. Now we're only going to do one style of button for this tutorial, but you can of course register multiple button styles. So we can just copy and paste this. And let's add another button. So we'll call it button 2, another button style. And if we save and refresh the post, you'll see that both these button styles now appear that we can choose from. So let me just edit my button text here to make it a little bit smaller, and we can get started on our styles. Now, before we get started, you may be wondering where to put your custom CSS code. A lot of people put it in a separate plugin if you have like the simple CSS plugin, or I use Custom CSS Pro, which is also a free plugin. I use this on a lot of my sites, but WordPress has a built-in spot to add custom CSS as well. So you can just click Customize. And if you go down to Additional CSS, you can add any CSS code you want right here. but I'm going to use this other plugin just so it's easier for you to see on the screen for this tutorial. All right, so first off, let's inspect our button just to see the structure of it so we can figure out how we want to write the code. So we're going to right click on it, go to inspect, and you can see it's in a block buttons container, which is stretches the full width of the page. And then the block button itself is just as wide as the link inside of it. And then inside the WP block button class, we have this link, which is the WP block button __ link. And that's what we're going to style. And if you can see, then you wonder, well, how does it know that it's the custom button that we just created? Well, you can see under the WP block button, it says is style icon button. And that's the new button style that we just registered with our little code snippet. So we're going to target this style with our code. So let's write our initial rule just so you can see what we're doing here. And I'm just going to copy this so it's easier. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a period in front of that. So it's WP block button class, which is also this other one. So we're going to put a period in front of that and combine them. There's going to be no space between them because they're in the same element. And all of our styles are actually going to be targeted at the A element, which is contained inside this class. So we're going to add the A after that, and then we can write all the rules that we want. All right, so let's add a couple base styles, and then I'm going to show you how to add the icon to our button. So the first thing I want to do is add some padding to my button. I'd like to have a little more space on the sides of the button. Otherwise, I think they look kind of small and wimpy. So we're going to add some padding, and we're just going to say padding. We'll leave the top. Let's see what the top is. All right, 5 pixels looks fine on the top, and let's try 20 pixels on the sides. I think we're going to need a little bit more actually. And let's try 9 pixels on the top and bottom. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And then let's actually set a minimum width. So even for small buttons, we want them to be at least so big. So let's say min width 200 pixels. And finally, I want to, I don't like these rounded buttons. I want the border radius to be more of a rounded rectangle. So let's say 5 pixels border radius. And so far, we haven't done anything too crazy. So you'll still be able to, we're not overriding any background colors or anything. So you'll still be able to set the background colors using the built-in Gutenberg editor colors if you would like. And now we're going to actually add the icon to our code. And we're going to use that, and we're going to add the icon using what's known as a pseudo-element. And what that is you basically can use CSS to create an HTML element either beside another one of your elements. So the first thing we need to do is make this position relative. And it's not going to change anything, but it allows us to position our pseudo element relative to this button. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our pseudo element. And there's 2 types of pseudo elements. There's a before and an after. It doesn't matter which one you use, but each element can have only 2. So we're going to just copy this whole rule or this whole selector, and we're going to just put a colon and make it the pseudo class after. And to create your pseudo element, all you have to do is use the content property and then just make it empty. 2 quotes. And you can't really see anything because it has no content. But if we go inside our A element here, you'll see that our after element has now been created out of thin air. And if you were to give it, say, just put the number in it, you can see it just puts that, whatever text you put in here, just puts it right after the link. For now, we just want it to be empty. We're going to be using the Fontawesome icon library to provide the icons for our button. And if you already have Fontawesome installed on your website, you're all set. If you don't have it yet, you'll either need to install it by watching this tutorial in the top right corner up here, or you can simply go to the WordPress plugin repository, add new, and then choose to install either the Fontawesome plugin or the Better Fontawesome plugin. And both of them make it basically a single click. You just activate the plugin and Fontawesome is automatically activated on your website. So the next thing we want to do is actually add the icon inside our pseudo element. So let's go to Fontawesome and just let's look at their icons. So you can choose any icon from their free list and we can sort by only free. But maybe something like this angle right would make sense for an animated button. And if you're actually editing the HTML code directly, you could put in something like this I class equals I, so the icon element. But because we're using a pseudo element, we have to use Unicode instead. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make our content this F105. So we're using the Unicode for the icon with this little slash before it. Now you can see that nothing appeared. There's just this empty box. And that's because we haven't told our pseudo element what font family to use. So we actually need to tell it to use Fontawesome. So we're going to make it font family, and then in quotes, Fontawesome 5 free. Now you can see that something happened, but not what we want. And the reason is because when you're using pseudo elements, you actually have to use a specific font weight for Fontawesome 5. And if you go to their documentation, you can see that these lighter font weights are only available in Fontawesome 5 Pro. But if you want to use Fontawesome 5 free, we need to set the font weight to 900. So we're going to go back here. So we'll go back here and we're just going to write font weight 900. And now there's our icon. That's all it took. All right, the hard part's actually done. We've got our button created. We've got the icon up and visible. And if we just want to create a simple animation, it really doesn't take that many more lines of CSS. So the first thing we need is a hover state for our button. So let's just copy this. And we actually want to put the hover after the A element. So when we hover the A element, we're going to talk about what the pseudo element, the after element, does. And we're going to put our brackets. And we want our pseudo element to move a little bit to the side, and we're going to animate that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a transform, and we're going to say transform translate X, and let's try 8 pixels to start. And what that's going to do is it's going to move the pseudo element 8 pixels to the right on hover. Now you can see that it's not doing anything, and that's because our pseudo element is the wrong type of element. Right now it's an inline element, and we want to make it an inline block so that it can be transformed. So if we say display inline block, and now if we hover, it moves. Okay. So let's add a little bit of spacing between the element in its initial state. So we'll say margin left 5 pixels, just as a little space. And now you can see it moves on hover. Now that's not an animated transition. It's just moving, sort of jumping in space. And we actually want it to be animated. That's one of the advantages of using the transform property, is it results in smooth animations. So all we have to make is, or all we have to do is add a transition property to our link here. And we'll say all we want to apply to all properties. And let's try 0.25 seconds to start. It's usually sort of a good starting point for links. And now if we hover, you can see that it moves smoothly. And we have ourselves a very nice animated button. Now you can see that we haven't really done any styling. We haven't added any colors or anything. And that's because if you do it this way, this actually allows you to customize the colors in the Gutenberg editor by using the color picker if you want on a per post basis. All right, so we're back in our post here. And if we click on our button, and let's choose a background color. So we can make it a gradient, for example. And we'll just pick this nice gradient, click update. And now back on the front end, we have this nice animated icon button, but it's taken on the color properties that we set in the back end. And one thing you might notice is that it's actually changing color a little bit on hover. Now we haven't set a hover effect, and you might wonder where that color style is coming from. And this is actually a trick that we used in the previous Gutenberg button tutorial, but let me show you how we're doing this. So this is some code that I have elsewhere on my site in a different CSS file. And I'm just going to paste in right here so you can see it. And what this does, you can ignore this, is just setting so this is just making the button color always white by default. But this is what's doing the magic. And this is putting a CSS filter on our button when it's being hovered. And what it's doing is it's rotating the hue of the button on the color wheel, and it's also saturating it. So it's increasing how colorful the button is by about 50% when you hover. And so that will work with any color button except for grayscale buttons, is it will apply a neat hover effect on any button regardless of what color it is. So you don't have to specify an exact color for each button. And we could just add a couple more buttons, and I'll show you how this works. And now on the front of our post, you hover over this, has a nice color change and transition effect. Hover over this, you can see it's like a very subtle color change. It becomes a bit brighter. So let's make this button a little bit more fun just because we can. So one thing you can do with pseudo elements, even though we use an after element and it's automatically just sort of putting it right after our button text, it doesn't have to be there. We can position it anywhere we want. And if you remember, we set position relative for the button itself, and that is going to allow us to absolutely position the icon anywhere we want. So let's just add a rule to our after element here. And we're just going to say position absolute. And all that does is you can see it takes it out of the flow. So now the icon is not pushing over our button text. Our button text gets to be centered in the button. So that's one nice perk of making this position absolute. And then we can actually position it inside or outside the button anywhere we want. So we could do, for example, top 0, and we'll align it at the top of the element, and we hover over the after element. You can see that it's actually touching the top of the button. And we could do right 0 and put it all the way on the side. And likewise, we could just move it to the left instead. So we could just move it to the left, and you can make the offset anything you want. You can make it 10 pixels, or you could do it 10% or 90%. Okay, all kinds of options. So we're going to use this to make an even cooler animation effect. So what I want to do is I want to line it up actually to the left of our button text. And to do that, we're going to have to set a fixed width for our pseudo element, and then we can use the fact that this button has guaranteed padding to position this properly. So let's try something like width 25 pixels, height 25 pixels, and we'll try left 15 pixels. So that's looking pretty close. And if you want to know why it's not lined up exactly on all the buttons, it's because we have this mid width set up here. So if we delete this line, well, that's smushed. So we're going to have to add some more padding on our button, actually. So let's add 40 pixels of padding just to make everything line up perfectly. And now, regardless of how much text you have, even if we deleted all the text in this button, or most of it, there would still be enough padding on the side that the icon would just be to the left of the text. Now, the icon is just moving over the text when we hover it, because we still have the same rule as we had before, and that's not what we want. So we are going to do a completely different animation for the button. And what I want to do is I want to move the icon all the way across, and then maybe like give it a background or a color or something fun. So how are we going to do this? On hover, instead of this translate property, we're actually going to adjust the left property so it can be animated all the way across. And to do that, we can't actually we can't use a number of pixels for the left, because we don't know how wide the button's going to be. It depends on the amount of text in the button. So we are going to have to actually calculate how far to push it. So we're going to try something like this. Left 100%. And if you see, that's moving it all the way off. It's actually over here somewhere. And so we want to pull it back a little bit. So we're going to actually calculate how much we want. You can use this calc function, and you do parentheses, calc 100% minus a certain number of pixels to pull it back inside the button. So let's try 25 pixels, and you got to make sure the spacing is just right. You have to have a space between the two numbers. And now that looks a bit too far, so we need to, so now it's shooting all the way across, and we actually might need a bit more. So let's try minus 35 pixels, because we are going to give this a background color too. So let's try background color. And just for fun, we'll start with this, which is going to be way too dark. And you can see it's now making it into this block thing, but we want to make it circular. So we'll say border radius 100%. And we're going to actually make it opaque. So let's inspect this. And we're going to go to the hover state of this, and then we'll select the after element. I know it's a little confusing. And you can see our background color is here. And let's change this to a RGB value. And we want to make this more like that. So that we want this to be transparent, so it will sort of darken whatever color button it is, and it will look good across a range of button colors. So let's try this one, and we'll just copy this rule. So background color is that RGB with some opacity. And now when you hover the button, it will animate between no background and that background, and it's got that nice border radius, and it looks good on every button color. So I think that's a pretty good button. All right, now I've added another button that's got the default styles. And how can we style our button so that the default is something other than what WordPress is setting it up? Now, we can't just paste our styles in the normal button rule, because it's going to override all the colors that we set in the WordPress editor. So we need to write a separate rule for our button. And we want to get a clue how to do that, we're going to inspect this. And you can see that this button and all the other buttons that we've set up in the Gutenberg editor that set up the colors have this has background class. So we're going to target any button that doesn't have this class. So we can write a rule, WP block button dot is style icon button is style icon button, and it's the A element that has the background class. So we're going to say we're going to use the not pseudo selector, and we'll put in the has background class, and make sure to put the period in there because it's a class. And now we can write our rule. And if we just paste this style right in there, you can see it only affected the default colored button and didn't overwrite any of the other styles from the buttons that we've set in the editor. And of course, you're only limited by your creativity and imagination if you want to add other styles to these buttons. For example, we could add a hover effect that maybe we just want to put some box shadow on when you hover. So we could say box shadow 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 6 pixels, and maybe we could borrow this style that we used previously, or this color. And now if we hover the button, there's this subtle box shadow, and you could make it, less opacity so it's more noticeable when you hover, just to make your button sort of three-dimensional on hover.
Did you enjoy this video? Please take a quick second to hit that like button. And if you want to continue improving your website building skills, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you get notified every time a new tutorial goes live. If you have suggestions for a future video or questions about this one, just let me know in the comments below. And if you're ready to keep learning now, I think you should watch this video next.